BookTube, Chelsea the Reading Outlaw here to do some year-end stats wrap-up, talking about the math of 2016 and the books that I read. So, I have notes. Obviously, I have notes. These are not things I'm going to remember off the top of my head. If you see me looking down, I am looking at my notes. I read 160 books this year. That means I read 106% of my 150 book goal. I will be upping the number next year. I'll be striving for 200 books. I feel like that's reasonable, especially if I continue the audiobook trend that I've been on. So, yeah. I'm going to go through this in kind of two ways. I'm going to talk about the really good numbers I had, some of the less good numbers that I had, and kind of the bigger picture of 2016 and how I feel about the reading that I did. So in terms of some of the higher numbers, I read quite a bit of science fiction, nonfiction, and fantasy this year. Here is the breakdown of the genres that I read. I do a lot of different subgenres, so this chart may be very confusing, but just trust, I read a lot of those three categories. That's probably not surprising to anybody. I read the most science fiction. I read 31 science fiction books, 18% of the overall titles. I also read 18% nonfiction, which means I also read 31 nonfiction books. If you'd asked me, I would have said that I felt like I read more than that. I felt like I read enough nonfiction books every month to be higher than that, but that's how the numbers came out. 31 nonfiction books, 18%. Then fantasy was 11% of my overall reading, or 19 titles. Again, I'm a little surprised. I think that's because I started a lot of series this year that I didn't actually get the chance to finish. In terms of format, here's another lovely chart. Most of my books were ebooks. So 25% of my overall reading was done digitally on ebook. That means that I read 45 books digitally. And the next one after that is audio. I read 41 books on audio, which is 23%. That actually sounds low to me. I was listening to so many audiobooks this year that I would have thought the number would have been way higher, but that is still like almost a quarter of the books I read I consumed via my ears, which is a stat that I'm proud of. I really like audiobook listening. It really, really works for me, so it's something that I really, really am enjoying doing more of. After that comes hardcover books. These are most of the books that I own. I tend to own a lot of books in hardcover, and I read 17% hardcover books, or 30 books overall. Not the best, but something I'm really, really proud of, because one of my goals this year was to read more of my own books. It's still a goal we'll work on for next year, but something that I'm really proud of that I managed to have to get done this year. And then lastly, I read 23 graphic novels, which is 13% of the overall number. I'm pretty sure that that only counts hardcover or like physical graphic novels. I didn't count the single trades I read through Comixology. Usually I would just wait till I read 5 of those and then count them as the trade. I think that's something I'm going to change for next year, because I think those stats would be different if I had counted my digital comics. But as of now, I'm only tracking the physical trades that I either purchase or can check out from the library. After that, in terms of the monthly breakdown of when I read the most books, I read 22 books in November and 21 books in March. So as you can see, those were my two biggest months. I'm not really sure why or what that breakdown is about. November was nonfiction November, so I listened to a ton of nonfiction on audio. And I was also doing my Christmas crafting, so I know that's where that came from. I'm not sure why March. I don't really know what was happening in March, but somehow I managed to read 21 books that month. Shortly after that, I also read 17 books in May and 17 books in December. So something about that like spring, summer, and then getting into fall and winter combo is just really good for my reading. My reading plummeted through actual summer, which I think is entirely the fault of having to run summer reading at the library. But that happens and that is expected. But yeah, very, very interesting. It'll be interesting to see if that kind of overall pattern continues in 2017. And then the author, this is a stat I'm really proud of. In terms of the gender of the authors I read 46% female, 38% male, and 7% both. Both is usually, or both in this case was writing duos or illustrator, writer, creative teams for graphic novels. There were quite a few male-female combo pairings in that area, and that counted as both. But yeah, I'm really glad. I'm really glad that I read more women than men. I'd like to up that even more, but I read 81 books by women and only 67 books by men. So I'm really proud of that. That's something that I wanted to do this year, was to flip that gender stat and to read more women than men. So goal accomplished. Yay me. Moving on to some of the stuff that I'm not so stoked with and will be working on really kind of improving or taking a look at in 2017. I read no historical fiction or classics. I'm kind of okay with the no historical fiction thing. I'm not so okay with the classics. I feel like my focus is usually so contemporary. There's a lot of stuff that falls by the wayside. And like with most genres, classics are just a matter of finding what works for me. So I need to do that because I really don't like seeing that 0% statistic. That does not work for me. I also read very little young adult this year. And here's the thing. I just didn't finish a lot of young adult. I started a lot. I read a lot of the first 50 pages of young adult because I do a lot of quick reads for purchasing for the library. So I do a lot of like preview reading and excerpt reading and stuff, but I really am bad about finishing those books that I start because I have to do it with such frequency. That is something I will be working on in 2017. There's no reason if I'm going to get into a book like that I shouldn't be able to continue on. Not with everything, because not everything I read is a gem that's worth continuing with, but with a lot more than I'm currently doing. I feel like there's a lot of stuff that I just don't finish, not because I don't like it, but because I just get distracted by another bright and shiny. And that's really something I need to work on, especially in young adult literature, because that's my field. That's the field in which I work. And then after that, I only read 2% poetry and middle grade. And again, these are just categories or genres that I feel like I need to read more of and would like to expose myself to more. It's not that I'm necessarily angry that I didn't, so much as I feel like maybe that's an area that could see improvement in the course of my reading life and could enrich my reading life in a way that's currently lacking. I also read 74% of my books came from after 2010, 28% were from this year, and 46% were from between 2010 and 2015. That's not great. There's a lot of stuff, even if it's not necessarily a classic, i.e. pre-1900, there's a lot of stuff between like 1970 and 2010 that I'm missing out on and that I'm not getting to. And, see again, the bright and shiny syndrome. But I think if I become more consciously aware of it and seek out things that don't fall in that time range, there's a certain kind of historical perspective that I can gain from that. And there's a certain kind of further context and exposure of what I'm currently reading that will come through reading books that were published in those earlier years. Lastly, the thing I wanted to talk about were my average star rating. My average star rating was a 3.42. Here's the thing. I don't necessarily know how I feel about that. I feel like I gave 48 books 5 stars this year. And that feels like maybe too many. And it's not that I don't love having 5-star reads, but the more I engage in the book community, the more I become aware and educated and present, the more I wonder how critically I'm assessing my own reading and how quick I am to stop at the emotional level of how my reading impacts me and not dig further below the surface. So that's not necessarily to say that that will change my rating in the long run, but I think that if I truly focus to stop and take the time to critically assess the things I'm reading, that star average might shift to more reflect the critical reader that I'm becoming. So yeah. I don't know what that means for 2017. I think it's just one of those things that I'm going to have to keep an eye on and just kind of see how it plays out and see what develops. But those are the stats I have for 2016. Coming up in the next video, I'll have my goals for 2017. So we'll talk a little bit about going forward in the future. But that's the big picture. Overall, I'm really happy with all the reading I did in 2016. I read a lot of Own Voices books. I read a lot of new authors. I read a lot of new to me genres. I just am really happy. I think when I look back on 2016, there's going to be a lot of things that I won't be happy about and that I won't be wanting to talk about or relive. But luckily, I think most of the reading I did is coming down on the positive side of the spectrum. So yeah, let me know how your year went. If you have a stats video or you want to nerd out over the numbers with me, please feel free to do so down below or to link it down below. I'm always here for comments, questions, and concerns. You can like and subscribe or come find me on social media if you want to talk books. Until next time, guys, you know the drill. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other. Have happy reading.